The valley was a wound carved deep into the Afghan mountains, its jagged walls rising like the broken teeth of some ancient beast. Dawn bled slowly into the sky, brushing the ridges with pale orange light, but the shadows below remained dark and menacing. Dust clung to the boots of the Navy SEAL team as they advanced in single file, rifles at the ready, eyes scanning every crease in the terrain. Each step carried the weight of training, discipline, and the quiet knowledge that this ground belonged to the enemy. Lieutenant Mark Henson led the column, his gaze sweeping over the ridgeline above. He didn't like valleys like this, boxed in on both sides. It reminded him of training scenarios back in Coronado, when instructors drilled into them that high ground always meant danger. He kept his voice low when he spoke into the radio. Stay tight. Eyes up. We're in their world now. The static that replied carried no clarity, just the ghost of a response drowned by interference. He frowned. Communications had been reliable an hour ago. Now, in the belly of this valley, the signal faltered. Behind him, Petty Officer Ramirez adjusted the heavy pack strapped across his shoulders. Sweat had already soaked through his camis, though the morning air was cool. His job was overwatch and heavy ordnance. He cradled the M249 like an old friend, the weapon's weight reassuring even when the silence pressed in. He glanced at the cliffs above, where jagged rocks jutted like natural sniper perches. Feels like a setup, he muttered. Everything here feels like a setup, replied Chief Petty Officer Kane, trudging just behind him. Kane was the oldest of the group, a veteran of more deployments than most of the younger operators could count. His face carried lines etched by sun and years of combat, his eyes sharp, always searching. Doesn't matter how many valleys you walk into, it never gets easier. The mission was supposed to be straightforward reconnaissance. Intelligence suggested Taliban fighters were using this sector as a staging ground, funneling weapons and supplies through hidden trails. Their orders were to confirm movement, capture details, and extract without engagement. In theory, it was simple. In practice, nothing in Afghanistan was simple. The medic Corpsman Evan Doc Mitchell moved near the rear, watching the others with the quiet focus of a man who knew his job might soon matter more than anyone wanted. He hated valleys like this for another reason: evacuation. Wounded men would be hell to move here, and helicopters had little room to maneuver, with cliffs boxing them in. He pushed the thought away and adjusted the straps on his aid pack. The valley stretched on for miles, twisting and narrowing, flanked by cliffs dotted with caves and ledges. Birds circled above, riding thermals. The crunch of boots on gravel was the only consistent sound. Every operator knew the silence was deceptive. Somewhere beyond the ridges, eyes were watching. Henson raised a fist, signaling halt. The team dropped into kneeling positions, scanning. He studied the rocks ahead, a pass narrowing into a bottleneck where two cliffs nearly met. That's where his instincts screamed at him. A choke point. The perfect place for an ambush. He clicked his radio again, trying to raise their comms relay team. Static answered. He tried again. Nothing. Interference, Ramirez whispered. Jamming, maybe? Or terrain, Kane said. His jaw tightened. Either way, we're deaf. They waited a beat longer, the wind carrying dust through the bottleneck like a warning. Henson weighed the options. They could backtrack, but that risked exposure on the open ridges behind. They could push forward, but the choke point offered no cover if things went bad. The mission clock ticked in his head. Recon had a window. Too much delay, and command would pull them out. He exhaled slowly. We move. Watch everything. The column advanced again, slower now, weapons raised. Every rock seemed to hold a shadow, every ledge a hidden barrel. Doc Mitchell felt his heartbeat in his ears, his breathing measured, steady but loud inside his skull. He forced calm, the way he had learned in training. Slow the breath, focus on the immediate. Left, right, above, below. Check, check again. They passed into the bottleneck. The walls rose higher, sheer stone crowding them on both sides. The sunlight narrowed, filtering through like a spotlight. Ramirez's finger tightened on the trigger of the M249. Kane's jaw clenched. Henson scanned the ridges, his instincts screaming louder with every step. Something wasn't right. They cleared the choke point and fanned slightly wider, but the sense of being funneled didn't leave. The silence had weight, pressing down like a physical thing. Then, faintly, they heard it a distant echo, carried on the wind. Shouts, maybe? Or was it just the valley twisting sound? Ramirez turned his head, eyes narrowing. Did you? Yeah, Kane cut in. Voices. Up high. Hansen raised a hand again. The team froze. The SEALs crouched, scanning ridges with scopes and naked eyes, searching for the smallest flicker of movement. Minutes passed. The valley returned only silence. Henson gave the signal to move again. Step by step, they pressed deeper into enemy ground. Dust rose in clouds behind them, boots grinding rock. Every operator felt the same pulse of tension, stretched thin and waiting to snap. They were ghosts in hostile territory, and ghosts didn't belong in daylight. Ahead, the valley widened slightly, opening into a basin-like hollow. From the cliffs above, faint glints of metal winked in the sun. Most would miss them. But Kane didn't. His veteran eyes caught it immediately. He hissed into the radio, though he knew no one would hear beyond the team. Gloss, left ridge. Someone's watching. The words ran like electricity through the squad. Every man adjusted, angling rifles toward the ridge. Still, no movement showed. Just stone and shadow. Henson's gut twisted. He wanted to call air support, wanted confirmation from overhead drones, but the radio remained dead. They were blind, deaf, and alone. Sir, Ramirez whispered. We pull back? Henson hesitated. The mission objective lay ahead. Intelligence suggested caches hidden in this sector. Retreat now meant failure, but pushing forward meant walking deeper into the lion's den. He swallowed hard. The men looked at him, waiting. Leadership wasn't about certainty. It was about deciding when certainty was impossible. We keep moving, he said quietly. Eyes sharp. Safety's off. The SEALs obeyed, spreading wider as much as the terrain allowed, rifles ready. The valley floor crunched beneath their boots, echoing off the cliffs. Overhead, the sun climbed higher, turning shadows into deep pools of black. Each man felt it, the invisible gaze from above, watching, waiting. Doc Mitchell's throat tightened. His hands flexed against the grip of his rifle. He thought of the oath he had taken, to preserve life. Yet here he was, walking toward death's door with men who trusted him to hold them together when things shattered. They reached the basin. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of smoke, faint but undeniable. Someone had been here recently. Maybe they were still here. Henson crouched, brushing his gloved hand against the ground. Fresh boot prints. Not theirs. Heavy. Recent. He stood slowly, eyes locking with Kane. The older man gave a grim nod. Confirmation. The team spread out, forming a defensive perimeter as Henson signaled a short halt. Silence fell again, broken only by the wind. Above, a bird cried sharply, startled from its perch. The sound echoed like a shot. Every operator froze, rifles snapping toward the ridges. The valley seemed to hold its breath. And in that stillness, just before the storm, each SEAL knew the mission had changed. The question was no longer if they would be attacked, but when. The enemy was here, and they were already waiting. The first shot came without warning, a crack so sharp it split the valley like lightning. A puff of dust jumped near Henson's boot, followed instantly by the stutter of automatic gunfire. It was as if the rocks themselves erupted. From the ridges above, muzzle flashes bloomed like angry stars, and the valley filled with the roar of machine guns. Contact left. Contact right. Kane shouted, his voice already half lost under the storm of noise. Bullets tore the air, pinging off stone, snapping past ears. The SEALs dropped to the ground in practiced unison, finding what cover they could behind scattered boulders and uneven terrain. Gravel bit into their elbows as they pressed down, returning fire in controlled bursts. Ramirez swung the M249 into position, bracing it against a rock ledge. His fingers squeezed, the weapon barking out a furious stream. Brass shells clattered around him as tracer rounds streaked toward the ridges. Laying it down, he yelled, though nobody needed the announcement. The weapon's chatter said everything. An RPG whooshed from the cliffs, its smoke trail curling like a serpent before slamming into the valley floor. The explosion lifted dirt and rock, showering the team in debris. The blast knocked Doc Mitchell backward, ears ringing, the world momentarily muffled. He scrambled back into position, pulling his rifle up, vision still blurred by dust. Henson's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. Return fire. Hold your ground. He scanned the ridgeline, searching for patterns in the muzzle flashes. There were too many. Dozens, maybe more. The insurgents had been waiting, dug into positions that overlooked every angle of the pass. It wasn't random fire. It was orchestrated. Kane's rifle snapped in steady rhythm beside him, each shot deliberate, aimed, lethal. They knew we were coming, he muttered, his jaw clenched. He wasn't wrong. The timing, the positioning, it all screamed premeditated. Someone had tipped them off. Another RPG streaked down, slamming into a boulder not far from Ramirez. Shrapnel ripped through the air, sharp fragments cutting into exposed skin. Ramirez cursed, blood streaking across his arm, but his grip on the M249 didn't falter. He kept firing, his weapon's roar answering the insurgents' storm. The valley had become a cage. High walls trapped them, funneling fire from above. Escape routes shrank to none. Dust and smoke swirled, making it harder to see, harder to breathe. The air stank of gunpowder and scorched stone. Every second stretched, every heartbeat a reminder that survival was balanced on a knife's edge. Doc crawled to the nearest wounded Petty Officer Daniels, who had taken shrapnel to the leg. Blood poured through torn fabric, staining the ground dark. "You're good, stay with me," Doc shouted, slapping a tourniquet high on the thigh, tightening until Daniels hissed in pain. Bullets snapped overhead, some so close they tugged at Doc's uniform. He kept working, refusing to flinch. "RPG team, top right ridge." Ramirez bellowed, spotting a trio of fighters reloading. He unleashed another burst, cutting them down before they could fire again. For a moment, a gap opened in the barrage, a breath of relief, then the opposite ridge answered with twice the fury. Henson ducked as rounds chewed into the rock near his head, fragments biting his cheek. He wiped blood away with his glove and shouted into his useless radio anyway. "Viper 1 to Overlord. We're in contact. Heavy? Request immediate air." Static. Nothing. The jamming held strong, their cries for help swallowed by the mountains. The team fought like wolves surrounded by hunters, snapping and striking wherever opportunity appeared. They shifted positions, leapfrogging from rock to rock, covering each other with precision born of endless training. Yet the sheer volume of fire was overwhelming. For every fighter they dropped, 3 more seemed to replace him. A grenade rolled down from above, clinking against stone before detonating. The shockwave threw dirt and shrapnel into the air, rattling helmets. Doc shielded Daniels with his body, gritting his teeth as fragments peppered his back. Pain lanced across his skin, but he pushed it aside, dragging Daniels deeper into cover. Ramirez roared in frustration as his belt ran dry. He slammed another in, yanking the charging handle with practiced fury, then opened up again, his weapon's voice a desperate counterpoint to the ambush. "I'm not dying in this F***ing valley," he screamed, squeezing the trigger until his hands shook from recoil. Kane's calm contrasted the chaos. He moved like a machine, firing, shifting, reloading, firing again. "Keep your heads," he barked. "We break, we die." His voice anchored them, pulling them back from the edge of panic. Still, the reality clawed at them. They were outnumbered, outgunned, cut off. No air support, no comms, no escape. The cliffs were alive with enemies, silhouettes darting from cover to cover, their rifles raining fire in relentless waves. The SEALs' ammunition dwindled faster than it should have. Each man felt the weight of every round fired, the math of survival tightening. Doc finished patching Daniels, then grabbed his rifle, firing at a figure on the ridge. The man dropped, tumbling into the valley with a lifeless thud. Doc barely noticed. His blood still pounded in his ears, his body running on pure adrenaline. Another explosion rocked the pass, closer this time. Dust blinded them, ears ringing with a deafening concussion. Henson coughed, vision clearing just enough to see the insurgents advancing. They weren't content to stay at a distance. They were moving in for the kill. He looked at his man Ramirez bleeding, but fighting like a madman, Kane steady as stone, Doc working and shooting in the same breath, Daniels pale but clinging to life. Each one was locked in, refusing surrender, even as the enemy closed in. "Goddamn," Henson muttered under his breath, the words lost in the chaos. His mind raced, calculating, searching for any path that didn't end in death. There was none. Not yet. They could only fight. The ambush had sprung its trap, and the SEALs were caught in its teeth. But they weren't done fighting. Not by a long shot. Pinned beneath the jagged ridges, the SEALs fought like cornered wolves, each man bound by training and instinct. The air throbbed with gunfire, a mechanical storm that never seemed to end. Every surface sparked under impacts, chips of stone cutting into exposed skin. No one dared lift their head for more than a second, yet they had no choice. Without returning fire, they'd be overrun. Lieutenant Henson pressed his back against a boulder, rifle hugged tight to his chest. He took a breath, counted, then leaned out and fired 3 quick rounds at a muzzle flash on the ridge. A figure crumpled, sliding down in a spray of dust. He ducked back as a barrage chewed into the rock where his head had been. His weapon felt like both lifeline and curse. Each bullet fired was one less between survival and the end. Ramirez slammed another belt into the M249, his hands slick with blood, some his own, some not. His arm burned from shrapnel, but he ignored it. "Keep them down," he roared, spraying a line of tracers across the ridge. Fighters scattered like insects, ducking into cover. The weapon's chatter echoed, but already the ammo box was light. He knew the math, and it was ugly. Chief Kane crouched beside him, eyes sharp, voice calm. "Short bursts, Ramirez. Don't waste it. Make them count." Ramirez spat blood from his mouth, gave a curt nod, then adjusted his fire. Even in chaos, Kane's presence steadied him. The old man had seen this before. Different valleys, different wars, same nightmare. Doc Mitchell dragged Daniels deeper into cover, the wounded operator groaning through clenched teeth. Blood seeped through the bandage, staining the ground dark. "Stay with me, brother," Doc urged, slapping another dressing in place. His hands moved automatically, muscle memory overriding the chaos around him. Each snap of gunfire, each explosion, tried to shake his focus, but he clung to the rhythm of care. Stabilize, secure, return fire. He finished, grabbed his rifle, and shot 2 bursts toward the advancing figures above. Both fell. He didn't wait to see them hit the ground. The valley became a crucible. Smoke hung in the air, acrid and choking, stinging eyes and throats. The sun, now higher, poured harsh light into the basin, but it brought no clarity, only sharper contrast to the shadows where the enemy hid. "Lieutenant!" Kane shouted, sliding into cover beside Henson. "They're probing both flanks. Trying to box us in." "I see it." Henson's voice was steady, though his heart hammered. He risked a glance upward. Fighters were crawling along the ridges, working angles, pouring suppressive fire to pin the SEALs tighter. They weren't reckless. They were disciplined, organized, and patient. "They're tightening the noose." Kane nodded grimly. "We'll cut it if we can." Another explosion shook the valley, close enough to rattle bones. Dust blinded them again, the taste of grit-filling mouths. Ramirez coughed, choking, and fired blindly to keep the pressure off. Henson yanked him down, forcing calm. Controlled. "Save the ammo. We'll need it." But even as he said it, he knew it wouldn't be enough. Their supply was finite. The enemy's wasn't. Minutes dragged like hours, the battle ebbing and flowing. Every time the SEALs pushed back, laying down bursts that thinned the enemy, the insurgents regrouped, finding fresh angles. It was like fighting the mountain itself, endless, unyielding. Doc checked on Daniels again, noting the pale skin, the shallow breaths. He bit down hard on the inside of his cheek, fighting despair. "Hang on," he whispered, though whether to Daniels or himself, he wasn't sure. Ramirez cursed loudly as his M249 clicked empty again. He tore open the last belt, feeding it through, but the sight of the dwindling ammo box made his gut clench. "Last one?" he shouted. "After this, I'm dry." Henson swore under his breath. He looked to Kane, who simply gave a hard nod. They both knew what that meant. When Ramirez's gun went silent, their suppressive power would vanish. Then the enemy would close the distance. Henson keyed the radio again, desperation leaking into his voice. "Overlord, this is Viper 1. We are pinned, heavy casualties, need CAS now." The static hissed back, cruel and empty. He slammed the handset against his vest, the futility of it like a punch to the chest. They were shouting into a void. "Lieutenant," Kane said, steady as ever. "We hold. We hold," Henson echoed, forcing steel into his tone. The insurgents pressed harder, emboldened by their own numbers. Shouts in Pashto echoed across the ridges. Taunts carried on the wind. The SEALs answered with steel. Each shot was measured, deliberate, a refusal to surrender. Doc dropped another target, then reloaded, his hands trembling not from fear but exhaustion. His mind screamed at him to stay alert, stay alive, stay fighting. He thought of home for a split second, the ocean, the sound of waves, and then shoved it away. There was only now. Only survival. Ramirez's last belt spat fire, the M249 roaring one final chorus. He cut down 3 men advancing down a slope before the weapon clicked, empty and final. He let out a guttural yell, slamming the gun aside and pulling his sidearm. "Come and get me, you bastards." Kane grabbed his shoulder, grounding him. "You're not done yet. Stay in the fight." His eyes, calm but fierce, locked with Ramirez's, pulling him back from the brink. Ramirez nodded, jaw set, switching to controlled pistol shots. The SEALs were bloodied, cornered, their numbers dwindling, but their will held like iron. Each man understood the truth. They might not leave this valley. but they damn sure make the enemy pay for every inch. The fight stretched into a rhythm of survival. Fire, reload, duck. Patch wounds, shift cover, fire again. Sweat and blood blurred into the dust, uniforms torn, bodies battered, spirits tested. They fought with the desperation of men who knew the odds and spat in their face. At one point, a lull fell, brief and unnatural. The enemy paused, regrouping. The SEALs crouched in silence, ears ringing, lungs heaving. Henson looked at his men, meeting each gaze in turn. He saw exhaustion, pain, and fear, but also resolve, unbreakable and raw. "We're not done," he said quietly, voice like steel in the storm. And they weren't. Not yet. The valley still echoed with gunfire, but inside the SEALs burned something stronger than despair. A refusal to die quietly. The next blast came without warning. A shrill whistle and a bone-rattling detonation tore through the valley. The explosion threw dirt, smoke, and stone into the air, ripping into their cover. Kane hit the ground hard, dust choking his lungs, ears ringing. When the haze cleared, he saw two men sprawled nearby Daniels, already wounded, and Petty Officer Briggs, motionless, blood seeping beneath his helmet. "Man down!" Kane barked. His voice cut through the gunfire, sharp and commanding, but his heart sank. Briggs wasn't moving. Doc Mitchell was already crawling toward him, pack dragging across jagged stone. Bullets hissed overhead, snapping so close he could feel the air they displaced. He ignored them. He reached Briggs, pulling him onto his back with practiced hands. The man's chest was shredded, shrapnel wounds tearing deep. Blood bubbled with each shallow breath. "Stay with me, Briggs," Doc shouted, ripping open his kit. He pressed gauze into the wound, blood soaking through instantly. His gloves were slick crimson, his heart pounding. Briggs's eyes fluttered, unfocused. Doc shoved more gauze in, pressing hard enough to make his hands ache. "Not today, brother. Not today." Another barrage slammed the rocks above, sending fragments slicing down. One shard cut across Doc's neck, hot and sharp, but he didn't flinch. He wrapped a chest seal across Briggs's wound, securing it with shaking fingers. The man coughed, blood splattering across Doc's arm. He forced air into Briggs with a resusc bag, ignoring the chaos around him. Henson slid into cover beside them, laying down suppressive fire. "Doc, how bad?" Doc didn't look up. "Bad? Real bad? Can he move?" "Not yet. I'll get him stable. Do it fast." Henson leaned out, firing controlled bursts, each one aimed, precise, deadly. He knew time was their enemy. Ramirez, bleeding from his arm, and now low on ammo, fired single pistol shots, teeth bared. He hit one fighter, then another, each pull of the trigger fueled by rage and exhaustion. His voice was hoarse when he shouted, "Running dry, Lieutenant." Kane crawled over, sliding another magazine his way. "Make it count." The valley roared with fire, but the SEALs clung to discipline. They moved like clockwork, covering each other, conserving what little they had left. Still, the strain showed. Sweat dripped through grime, eyes bloodshot, bodies trembling. Every man felt the creeping weight of fatigue, of wounds ignored, of hope slipping. Doc shifted focus. Briggs's pulse was fading. He pushed epinephrine, praying for a response. For a moment, nothing. Then Briggs gasped, a wet, rattling breath, but a breath nonetheless. Relief surged through Doc, but it was fragile. Briggs was alive barely. Moving him would mean exposing them all. "Doc!" Kane barked, pulling him back into reality. Incoming left ridge. Doc grabbed his rifle, pivoted, and fired 3 bursts, dropping an advancing fighter. Then he returned to Briggs, sealing bandages tighter, whispering under his breath. "Hold on. Just hold on." The medic's world had shrunk to blood and fire, but his hands never stopped. Every action was urgent, precise, born of training and desperation. He wasn't just fighting the enemy. He was fighting death itself, clawing seconds from its grip. Henson pulled back, face streaked with dirt and sweat. His jaw was tight, his mind calculating. "We're bleeding out here, Chief." Kane reloaded calmly, eyes cold. "Then we bleed fighting." Another RPG shrieked down, exploding near Ramirez. The blast tossed him back, his pistol flying from his grip. He hit the ground hard, ears ringing. Blood streaked his forehead. He staggered, dazed, until Kane yanked him into cover. "You good?" Kane barked. Ramirez spat blood, grabbed his knife, and grinned through the pain. Still ugly, still fighting. That was enough. Kane shoved him back toward cover. The SEALs were battered, wounded, and cornered, but none quit. Each injury became another reason to fight harder. Doc stitched wounds with bullets still flying. Ramirez laid fire with blood running down his arm. Kane anchored morale with steel in his voice. And Henson led with the grim determination of a man who refused to let his brothers die in vain. Morale wavered, yes. Fear gnawed at their edges. But training, brotherhood, and stubborn defiance welded them together. The enemy pressed closer, their taunts louder now, confident. They thought the SEALs were breaking. They thought blood and wounds would end them. But the SEALs fought wounded. They fought bleeding. They fought with everything left. Because surrender wasn't in their vocabulary. Because giving up wasn't an option. And because every man knew, if this valley became their grave, it would be a grave carved in fire. The air was thick with smoke, dust, and the metallic sting of blood. Every surface around the SEALs bore scars of the battle rock faces shredded, dirt pockmarked by shrapnel, and bodies of enemy fighters sprawled among the jagged terrain. Yet for every fallen insurgent, more seemed to take their place. Shadows moved on the ridges above, silhouettes against the dying light, rifles flashing as they poured fire into the canyon below. The SEALs' world had shrunk to the shallow cover of broken boulders. They had fought, bled, and endured, but their strength was unraveling thread by thread. Lieutenant Henson ducked behind a slab of rock, his round sparked inches from his face. His M4 clicked dry. He cursed, swapping to his last magazine. Only 20 rounds left, 20 breaths of survival in a storm of fire. He glanced at Kane, who was feeding a belt into the saw with grim determination. The chief's jaw was tight, eyes focused, every movement deliberate, but his knuckles were pale from the strain. Nearby, Doc Mitchell worked feverishly, his hands crimson to the wrists. Briggs lay beside him, unconscious, chest rising shallow and uneven despite the seal patched across it. Doc's every second felt stolen. Each breath Briggs took a victory ripped from death. He whispered instructions under his breath, half to his patient, half to himself. "Hang on, just a little longer. We're not done yet." Ramirez leaned against a rock, blood soaking the torn sleeve of his uniform. His pistol rested limp in one hand, empty magazine dangling. His knife gleamed in the other. His voice was hoarse when he muttered, "That's it. Dry." Henson's gaze swept the team. Ammo gone. Men bleeding. Comes dead. Air support too far to matter. For the first time, he felt the weight of failure press down on his shoulders like an avalanche. Training had prepared them for everything except hopelessness. Another RPG screamed down, striking close enough to shake the earth beneath them. The explosion rattled teeth and carved smoke into the valley floor. Shrapnel whizzed through the air. Kane shielded his face, gritting his teeth as fragments shredded into his arm. He grunted, pain flashing across his features, but he didn't stop firing. The enemy's confidence grew with every passing minute. Their shouts in Pashto echoed across the valley, taunts and promises of death. The SEALs didn't understand every word, but the tone was clear. Their hunters were closing in. Henson's breathing slowed as he pressed his back against the rock, the weight of command crushing him. He thought of the families waiting thousands of miles away. Wives, children, mothers, fathers, all unaware of the hell their sons endured in a nameless valley. He thought of the mission, of promises made to protect one another, and for a moment, doubt crept into his heart. They had fought with courage, with skill, with fire. But courage could not stop bullets. Fire could not outlast an army. Kane's weapon jammed, the SAW's last belt spent. He cleared it quickly, but there was no more to feed. He drew his sidearm, checking the single half-loaded magazine. His hands shook from fatigue and blood loss. He didn't let it show. Doc caught his eye, a flicker of unspoken truth passing between them. They couldn't hold. Not like this. Silence fell for a breath between mirages. In that fragile moment, Ramirez chuckled bitterly, the sound raw and broken. So this is it, huh? Nobody answered. The weight of truth pressed too heavily. Then, barely above a whisper, Kane spoke. His voice was rough, ragged, but it carried the raw ache of every man there. Goddamn, help us. It was not shouted. It was not ordered. It was not even meant for the men beside him. It was a plea sent upward, to the sky hidden by smoke, to whatever force might still be listening. A prayer from a warrior who never prayed. A cry from a heart that refused to quit, but could no longer carry the weight alone. For a moment, time seemed to still. The gunfire faded into the background, like the world itself paused to hear. The words hung heavy in the smoky air, carving into the men's souls. Doc felt his throat tighten as he pressed harder on Briggs's wounds. Ramirez lowered his knife, closing his eyes briefly, lips moving silently. Henson gripped his rifle, steadying his breath. Kane kept scanning the ridge, finger hovering on the trigger, but deep inside, something shifted. It wasn't surrender. It wasn't defeat. It was honesty. Brutal, naked honesty. They were at the edge, and only a miracle could drag them back. The enemy began shouting again, louder now, closer. Shadows crept down the slope, figures maneuvering with confidence. The SEALs prepared themselves for the final stand. They exchanged glances, no words necessary. If death came, they would face it together. Kane chambered around. Ramirez gripped his knife tighter. Doc leaned over Briggs, shielding him with his own body. Henson exhaled slowly, eyes narrowing, finger tightening on the trigger. Hope was nearly gone. But in the darkest pit of despair, a spark still glowed, the spark of defiance, of faith, of men refusing to die quietly. And though they didn't know it yet, that whispered prayer had already been heard. The valley had grown unbearably still. Between each burst of enemy fire, there was a silence heavy enough to crush the lungs, the silence of predators, savoring their kill. The SEALs crouched low behind their battered rocks, every man bracing for the final push. Their weapons were nearly dry, their bodies bleeding, and their spirits dragged through the mud of exhaustion. Kane's whispered plea still lingered in the smoke-filled air like an echo that refused to die. Then came the sound. A crack sharp, clean, surgical. Different from the ragged staccato of a K-fire, different from the thunder of their own rifles. It was the sound of precision, a single thread of death, woven through chaos. An insurgent on the ridge jerked violently, his head snapping back before his body tumbled down the slope. For a second, even the gunfire paused. Confusion rippled through the enemy ranks. Who fired that shot? The SEALs froze too, their eyes darting, searching for the source. None of them had fired. None of them had seen it coming. Then another crack split the air. Another fighter fell, chest caved in, rifle clattering against stone. Panic spread among the insurgents, their shouted orders dissolving into chaos. Some dropped low, scrambling for cover, scanning the ridges where no ally of theirs should have been. "Sniper," Kane muttered, his voice tight, almost disbelieving. Henson's eyes narrowed. He leaned out, tracking the chaos unraveling among their attackers. Not one of theirs. The implication hit like a surge of adrenaline. Somewhere, somehow, another gun had joined the fight, and it wasn't pointed at them. Doc blinked through sweat and grime, hands still pressed to Briggs's wound. His heart hammered in his chest, disbelief mixing with a fragile thread of hope. No way. Tell me I'm not hallucinating. Another shot. Another body crumpled. This time the kill was so precise that it seemed unreal and insurgent mid-stride, dropped clean before his boot hit the ground. Ramirez laughed, the sound raw and broken, but alive. Whoever the hell he is, he just bought us a second wind. The sniper's rhythm was relentless yet patient. Each round counted. Each shot told a story of mastery. There was no spray of bullets, no wasted fire, only cold, calculated execution. For every muzzle flash on the ridge, a body dropped seconds later. The insurgents faltered, momentum shattered. Their shouts shifted from triumphant to frantic. They scrambled, ducking low, trying to spot the invisible hunter stalking them from afar. Kane adjusted his grip on his sidearm, eyes narrowing with renewed fire. Use it? Move positions while they're distracted. The SEALs didn't need further orders. Henson slid to a new angle, firing controlled bursts to amplify the chaos. Ramirez, despite his bloodied arm, darted across open ground, diving into deeper cover as Kane laid down suppressive fire. Doc shielded Briggs as best he could, dragging him closer to safety during the brief window. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, the team moved with purpose rather than desperation. They weren't just holding anymore. They were fighting back. Another enemy fighter raised his RPG, preparing to fire blindly into the SEAL's cover. Before he could squeeze the trigger, his chest exploded in a mist of red, the sniper's bullet cutting him down mid-motion. The RPG clattered harmlessly against stone. Henson barked a laugh, sharp and savage. He's cleaning house, but questions gnawed at the edges of their minds. Who was he? Where had he come from? How had he found them in this cursed valley at the exact moment their hope had run dry? None of it made sense. For now, it didn't have to. The sniper's presence was like oxygen to drowning men. Each crack of his rifle was a reminder that they weren't alone, that someone, somewhere, had heard Kane's desperate plea and answered with fire. Doc looked at Briggs, still unconscious but alive, chest rising faintly. He pressed a blood-slick hand to the man's shoulder, whispering, "You hear that, brother? Somebody's watching over us." The insurgents began pulling back, their confidence unraveling with each casualty. The ridge that had felt like a cage now became their prison, every exposed movement punished by invisible death. Henson reloaded his last mag, voice steady again. "We push when he pushes. Stay tight." Another crack. Another body. Another chance. The SEALs read the rhythm of the sniper's fire, synchronizing their movements with his unseen hand. When he dropped one target, they suppressed the others. When he forced fighters to cover, they shifted positions. Slowly, painfully, they began to reclaim ground. The valley was still alive with danger. The SEALs were still outnumbered, still battered and bloodied, still bleeding into the dust. But something fundamental had shifted. The taste of despair was fading, replaced by grit, defiance, and the faintest spark of hope. Ramirez spat into the dirt, gripping his rifle again. "I don't know who the hell this guy is, but I'm buying him a drink if we get out of here." Kane allowed the smallest of nods, his face carved from stone, but his eyes burning anew. "First round's on me," and above them, somewhere in the shadows of the ridge, the unseen ally kept his vigil, each bullet answering the prayer that had risen from broken ground. The sniper's cracks split the tension like thunder. Every body that fell was a lifeline thrown to the SEALs, each round an invisible hand guiding them through the storm. Henson felt the first real pulse of hope in what seemed like hours. He didn't allow himself to smile, didn't allow relief, yet the energy of possibility surged in his chest. "Move on my mark," Henson whispered, barely audible over the echoing gunfire. "We break left, cover each other. Ramirez, you're suppressing the right ridge." Ramirez barked a guttural laugh, blood streaking his face. "Finally. About time someone gave us a fighting chance." A team leapt into motion. Kane laid down suppressive fire as Henson and Ramirez coordinated their small flanking movements. Every step was measured, deliberate, but faster now. The air that had been thick with dread became charged with controlled aggression. Doc Mitchell stayed low, dragging Briggs as carefully as the terrain would allow. Each step sent jabs of pain through the medic's already battered arms, yet he ignored it, moving with grim determination. "Almost there," he muttered to himself, glancing up to watch the sniper's invisible orchestration unfold. Above, the unseen marksman continued his deadly rhythm. Each shot punctured the enemy's confidence. Each precise kill shredded morale. The insurgents, who had once pushed forward with terrifying certainty, now stumbled, ducked, and fled. Some retreated to higher ground, others froze in confusion, unsure of where death would strike next. Henson's mind raced. He calculated angles, enemy positions, wind direction, timing of shots. His team was battered, low on ammo, and wounded, but for the first time, he could see an escape. "Cover fire now," Henson shouted. "Push up, push up." Ramirez and Kane unleashed volleys toward the surviving insurgents, forcing them to crouch behind rocks. The SEALs slipped forward, inch by inch, carving a path through the valley. They were still under fire, still bleeding, still fighting, but now the fight had purpose. The sniper's unseen presence was a ghost tethered to their backs, his bullets dictating rhythm and space. Henson realized that for the first time, the initiative was theirs. They weren't merely reacting anymore, they were shaping the battlefield. Doc ducked low, checking Briggs again. The wounded man's chest rose with shallow, irregular breaths, but he was alive. "Hang in there, buddy," Doc whispered, pressing a hand to his shoulder. He glanced at the sniper's ridge, almost feeling a sense of gratitude for the faceless guardian who had arrived when all hope seemed lost. Another insurgent peeked over a ridge, rifle ready. Before he could fire, a clean shot rang out. He fell backward, arms flailing, then hit the ground in a crumpled heap. The sniper's precision forced the enemy into a constant, unnatural caution, halting their advances. Henson seized the moment. "Move! Cover fire now!" He led the push toward a narrower pass, dragging momentum with him. Ramirez flanked the right, laying suppressive fire, while Kane shifted to cover the rear. Every movement was a chess piece played in a deadly game. The insurgents scrambled, pulling back towards secondary positions, trying to regroup. The SEALs, though battered, pressed relentlessly. Their movements became more aggressive, each man drawing from sheer force of will and desperation. Dust and debris swirled with the spent casings and smoke of repeated gunfire. The valley echoed with chaos, yet within it, a rhythm emerged, a rhythm led by skill, courage, and an unseen ally high above. Henson paused briefly behind a boulder to reload, chest heaving. "We're taking the ridge." he shouted, teeth bared. Ramirez pushed forward alongside him, knife in one hand, rifle in the other. Finally, "Let's end this," he yelled. The SEALs advanced in bursts, ducking behind boulders, then charging forward when gaps opened. They moved like a single organism, bloodied but unbroken. The sniper's shots kept the insurgents pinned, every death sending shockwaves of fear down their lines. Kane called out, voice steady even as he bled from multiple scratches. "Keep moving. Don't stop." Doc adjusted Briggs, dragging him over jagged stone, pressing his face low to avoid fire. He kept an eye on the sniper's work, noting the enemy's faltering cohesion. "We're not dead yet," he muttered, letting the words act as a mantra. The enemy's counterattack began to crumble. What had been an organized, terrifying ambush evolved into panicked resistance. Fighters retreated toward higher ground, shouting and gesturing frantically. They had lost the initiative, lost the psychological edge. Every precise bullet from the sniper compounded their confusion. Henson and Kane exchanged a glance, a silent acknowledgement of a small but critical victory. For the first time, they were dictating the terms of engagement. The fear that had gripped them hours ago began to shift into controlled aggression. Ramirez took a deep breath, fire in his eyes. "Push them. Keep the pressure." Doc moved alongside Briggs, scanning constantly. Every movement counted, every step a fight against exhaustion, blood loss, and fear. Yet Briggs's shallow breaths steadied slightly, as if understanding the tide was turning in their favor. Henson adjusted his scope, marking the positions of remaining insurgents. The sniper above continued to thin their ranks, unseen, merciless, precise. With every shot, the SEALs gained ground, inching closer to survival. The valley, once a death trap, was slowly being reclaimed. Rocks, dust, and smoke still concealed danger, but the SEALs had a lifeline momentum. And as long as the sniper's invisible hand guided them, they could turn chaos into opportunity. Step by step, position by position, the SEALs fought back. Bloodied, battered, and exhausted, they clawed toward survival. Each man understood that the fight wasn't over, but for the first time, victory felt possible, not complete, but possible. Henson allowed himself a brief glance at his team. Kane, Ramirez, Doc, Briggs, they were alive. Still breathing. Still fighting. And the unseen sniper above continued his lethal symphony, shaping the battlefield with every shot, turning despair into defiance. The tide had turned. The valley that had almost swallowed them now witnessed their resurgence. And somewhere, above the ridge, the invisible ally prepared for the next precise strike. The valley, once a living nightmare, had quieted. Smoke drifted lazily through jagged cliffs, curling over spent casings and shattered rocks. The echo of gunfire had faded to distant rumble, leaving only the shallow, ragged breaths of the survivors. The SEALs leaned on their rifles, knees buckling, bodies slick with sweat and blood. Their eyes swept the battlefield, scanning for signs of life, friend or foe, but the enemy had vanished, retreating to higher ground, broken and demoralized by the sniper's unseen hand and the team's hard-fought resilience. Henson pressed a hand to his forehead, wiping grime and blood from his eyes. For hours, he had carried the weight of command through chaos, through fire, through despair. Now he allowed himself a single breath of relief. They had survived. Somehow they had survived. "Status," he muttered, voice hoarse, throat raw from shouting and smoke. Kane shook his head slowly, exhaustion carved into every line of his face. Everyone's alive, mostly. Just wounds and bruises, but alive. Doc Mitchell was still over Briggs, checking vitals. The wounded man stirred, groaning softly. Briggs's chest rose a little steadier than before. Doc gave a small nod, relief washing over him. "He's going to make it," he said quietly, almost to himself. "Thanks to everyone." His eyes flicked to the ridge, knowing the unseen sniper had bought them the time to stabilize the wounded and regain control. Ramirez slumped against a rock, knife and empty pistol resting on his lap. His arm was bandaged, but the blood hadn't stopped. He grinned faintly through grime and exhaustion. "I don't even care about the ammo anymore. That, whoever that was, saved our asses." Henson didn't respond immediately. He simply allowed himself to glance upward, eyes scanning the ridges. The sniper was gone now, vanished into the jagged terrain as mysteriously as he had arrived. No signals, no markers, no hint of identity. Just the result. The enemy rooted, the SEALs alive. The team began moving cautiously toward the extraction point. Every step was deliberate, mindful of traps and potential ambushes, but momentum had returned. The fear that had gripped them since the first shot had loosened its hold. For now, survival mattered more than pride or glory. Doc stayed close to Briggs, keeping a hand pressed to his chest, monitoring for any setback. "You did good," he muttered. Briggs's lips parted in a weak, tired smile. Kane swept the valley behind them, eyes never letting down their guard. "We're not out yet," he said simply. "Keep moving." They reached a small clearing near the edge of the valley where dust rose from rotor wash. The extraction helicopter hovered overhead, a dark silhouette against the fading light. Henson signaled, and Kane moved to cover the rear, while Ramirez and Doc guided the wounded toward the aircraft. The rotor blades kicked up a storm of dust, debris, and heat, a reminder that survival was still an effort, a struggle to the very last step. As they climbed aboard, each man allowed himself a fraction of release. Briggs was secured onto the stretcher, stabilized and conscious enough to squeeze Doc's hand. Ramirez collapsed into the nearest seat, helmet off, hair plastered to his bloodied face. Kane stayed vigilant until the last man was aboard. Henson was last, sweeping the valley with one final glance, noting every rock, every shadow, every place where men had fallen. Once airborne, the valley fell away beneath them. Henson closed his eyes, letting the vibration of the rotor and the rush of wind fill the silence between the storms of memory. They had endured fire and death and walked through the worst this place could throw at them. Somehow they had survived. "Goddamn, help us," Kane muttered quietly, repeating the words he had whispered in desperation hours ago. This time, they were not words of despair. They were words of acknowledgement, of gratitude, for the unseen ally, for each other, for the stubborn refusal to quit. Doc Mitchell wiped sweat and grime from his face, watching Briggs breathe easier. "We made it," he said softly. "All of us, alive, against all odds." Ramirez let out a long, shaky laugh. "I still don't know who that sniper was, but I owe him a beer. Or 100. Henson allowed himself the smallest smile, the weight of command easing slightly. "Some things we may never know. Doesn't matter. They did their part. We did ours. And we're alive. That's enough." Below, the valley receded into shadows, hiding the bodies, the blood, the echoes of a fight that had tested every fiber of courage, skill, and willpower. Every SEAL aboard that helicopter carried the scars of the day, visible or not, a testament to what they had endured. For hours after, silence hung inside the aircraft. Each man processed in his own way, some staring at the landscape below, some closing their eyes, some simply breathing. Words were unnecessary. They had lived through a storm of bullets, explosions, and fear, and somehow emerged whole. Henson's gaze returned to the ridges, half expecting to see the sniper, to nod in gratitude, or to finally understand the man's identity. There was nothing. Only the mountains, eternal and indifferent, holding secrets they would never know. Still, the team had been saved. Their lives were preserved by courage, both their own and that of the hidden marksman who had arrived when hope had nearly vanished. As night fell, the helicopter carried them away from the valley, leaving behind the chaos, the fire, and the haunting memory of a near-death ordeal. Each man allowed himself a thought of home, of life beyond this canyon of death, knowing that the fight had changed them, but had not broken them. For the first time in hours, they laughed. Quietly, yes, tentatively, but it was laughter, a small human victory in the shadow of the unimaginable. And somewhere, in the jagged ridges above the valley, the sniper who had turned the tide vanished into the shadows, leaving only the echo of the first shot, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, an unseen hand can shape fate. The SEALs would remember the valley, the ambush, and the friend they never saw, but whose presence saved them. They would carry the scars, the lessons, and the memory of survival through every mission to come. And in the quiet moments, when the adrenaline faded and reality returned, they would remember the whispered plea that had reached ears beyond their own. "Goddamn! Help us!" And help had come.